My name is Steve Bloom, and I'm here to talk to you today, Joys of Hemp. I'm very proud to be here, very excited about this event, a first-time event in New Jersey. I want to thank Kenny Tuglia and all the folks, Sarah and everybody else who helped put this together. It's very special to do this. You know, this is what is pretty common out west, and all these business conferences and stuff like that are popping up everywhere, but we haven't had anything really that close to home like this, so I'm very excited to be here today. I'm here because I'm a longtime marijuana activist, and my role has been in the media. By being in the media, I can also wear like multiple hats. You could be a writer, an editor, an author. You could also be an activist. And that happened for me when I started working at High Times magazine. So I'm sort of dating myself back 25 years now, which is interesting because I was thinking today, okay, what am I going to talk about? And I was kind of thinking about my years, you know, my life as an activist and, you know, what I've seen, reflecting a bit. And then I realized, wow, you know, we got a 25th anniversary actually, because 25 years ago, this day, I was in Ann Arbor for the Hash Bash. And it was my first Hash Bash, and it was my first year with High Times. I'd started at High Times in October '88. My first issue was the January '89. I had done a couple of freelance things for High Times. My background before that was basically a music type journalist. I would cover sports. I would cover anything that generally interested me, but I wasn't really a news writer per se, more of a feature writer. Did interviews with musicians, concert reviews, album reviews. I did some sports writing. I wrote a book about video games. I wrote a book about basketball just before I worked at High Times. But a friend of mine had taken a job at High Times, and someone I knew in the business, and his name is John Holmstrom, really kind of great cartoonist who veered off into being an editor over at High Times. And so John had invited me up to do a couple of things, a couple of freelance pieces, a little proofreading. And then one day I got a phone call from him, and he said, "Hey Steve, we got a job open for the news editor slot." And he said, "It's a part-time job, but we need to fill it, and, you know, do you want it?" And I was in the middle of writing my basketball book, so I said to him, "Yeah, sounds great. Can you wait a few months until I get this book done?" He said, "Sure." So I started there in October of '89, and it was a real eye-opener. It was a fun office. I used to be an editor at my college newspaper. I'm from New York. I'm from the Bronx. I went to DeWitt Clinton High School. I was on the DeWitt Clinton newspaper. You would see. I was on, the Clinton News. I kind of cut my teeth there. Went to the journalism class when I was very young in high school. Learned a lot at that time because you had to be in the journalism class to be on the newspaper. Went to Lehman from there and was on the newspaper at Lehman, the Meridian, which I became editor of in my third year. And so when I got to High Times, after a lot of years freelancing and doing a variety of things and some jobs, but a lot of freelancing, I felt like I was sort of back at college in a way. High Times just felt like a fun environment, and people are having a good time in the office, and so I started there, worked part-time, and I worked for say 2 weeks on and 2 weeks off, and my job was to fill up about 8 pages of news in the front of the magazine. They don't really have that anymore because everything goes on the internet. And there was a section, if anybody goes that far back with High Times, when High Times still was a little bit, financially strapped and couldn't really afford, all the pages to be color. So they had a whole section that was sort of newsprint, and I was doing the newsprint section. So that was the news. So I put together the news, and again, think back in time a little bit, 25 years. Back then there was no internet. Everything was a letter written in the mail, and I was the person who got all the mail. And I got a stack of it, a box of mail just to go through, people writing their letters to High Times, and it came to me. And so I started reading all these letters, and it really turned into a lot of horror stories. I got arrested, I got arrested, I got arrested. So I really didn't know what the hell was going on out there in the marijuana world. I was a marijuana smoker from high school on. New York was decriminalized, so it was kind of hard to get in trouble for marijuana in New York back in those days. These days things changed, but back then you really had to kind of walk past a cop, step on his foot, and blow smoke in his face for him to bother you. These days, not so much. So back then, it was still kind of new to me. I hadn't gone to the marijuana rallies in New York. I was kind of like an apathetic smoker. I was one of those people who smoked with my friends, went to concerts, did what we did, got stoned, but wasn't active about changing the marijuana laws. So obviously that started to change for me when I worked at High Times, because it kind of brings you into a greater understanding of what's happening out in the world, especially when it comes to, of course, marijuana. So in that position, I did what I did, and I did it for several years as news editor, and I learned a lot. And so when I'm thinking back to like 25 years ago when I started, and 25 years ago today, I was at Hash Bash in Amsterdam. That was really like the door had just swung wide open to my life as a marijuana activist, and it was a lot of fun. Steve Hager is here today from High Times, who was editor-in-chief at the time when I came in, and he, had this great vision that he wanted to really, get the marijuana movement going again, and he thought it would be, fun to, get, energize Hash Bash by coming out to Ann Arbor from New York in a psychedelic bus with about 30 crazy hippies on the bus. The bus kept breaking down. Remember, we stopped off for a little while in Kent, Connecticut during a snowstorm, and then picked up, and then finally got to Ann Arbor. And the next day, we marched in, everybody wearing tri-corner hats, the freedom fighters that Steve had started, and we made a big sort of impact on the Hash Bash by just storming in there the way we did and writing about it. And then, as time went on, the Hash Bash started to pick up again. It was just a great event. And happening again today, 40, I don't know how many years Hash Bash, since 1971. So you see the big picture of like so many things going on all at one time. We have Hash Bash happening today in Ann Arbor. We have Joyce of Hemp here happening in New Jersey. Down in DC, there's a unity conference for medical marijuana, Americans for Safe Access. So it's kind of like, protests, rally, conference season has begun. And so here we are today. And so for me, it's just been this journey over those years as things evolved for me at High Times. Because of my background in music and entertainment, I kind of steered away from the news after a couple of years. Steve Hager realized that I'd probably be better suited to do music stuff and interviews and celebrity stuff. And so I got, but I kind of got my feet wet as news editor, learned a lot, which was really helpful for me. I kind of got just a base foundation of my understanding. Plus, I also, as news editor, was responsible for being kind of liaison to Normal. And Normal was really the only major activist group out there at the time. Now there's Marijuana Policy Project and the Drug Policy Alliance and so many other groups out there. But Normal was number one and the place to be. And so I learned a lot, being in the world of the activists. When I went to Hash Bash, I met Jack Herer, for instance. Anybody know Jack Herer, the author of The Emperor Wears No Clothes? The Emperor, the guy who kind of lit a fire for so many of us at that point to get involved. And so there were people like that there. As a matter of fact, first year there, was there part of the fun. Second year, I went out to do some coverage, to go around covering what they called Hemp Tour. And Hemp Tour was like an extended version of Hash Bash, going from campus to campus doing protest rallies, led mostly by Jack Herer and his coterie, people like Ben Maisel, who's also passed on, and a lot of the marijuana activists, from sort of that period of time. And so I sort of spent my first year just kind of learning a little bit and being a little quiet, watching everything. And then the second year I go out for Hash Bash again, but this time I went on my own because I was going to do a little tour of cities, and I was starting with the day before Hash Bash, and I was in East Lansing, Michigan at University of Michigan State. And so I arrived, and I'm kind of like hanging out with Jack a little bit, and then I get here from the stage, Ben Maisel says, "Oh, we heard Steve Blue from High Times is here. Come on up to the stage, Steve, and say a few words." And so lo and behold, I had never really spoken to a crowd about marijuana. I was like pushed out, in front of that crowd. And so, here I am today, all these years later. How you doing? Nice to see you. And Jim Miller, everybody. And so, but that's sort of like my sort of baby steps to get involved. And for me, again, at High Times, so when I shifted away from news, I went more into the entertainment side. And it was a really great fertile period, the early 90s, when I was sort of in my kind of first era at High Times, was to dive into the music scene. And the early 90s was terrific. The rock scene, the hip hop scene, alternate rock, indie pop. There was so many cool things going on. And some of these bands really liked High Times. We didn't quite know this until we did a cover story, did back-to-back cover stories on the Black Crowes and Cypress Hill. And that just sort of opened up the floodgates. Every band wanted to be in High Times at that point. So I had no shortage of interviews to do. There was just constant opportunities with bands, and it was just a great period. So I met so many people and so many cool bands back then. Some of them are still going along, like 311, Cypress Hill. Some of them have sort of, gone through some changes, Blues Travelers, Sublime, Blind Melon, or bands like that. Lost some people along the way, sadly. We learned the hard way that those who do hard drugs may not last as long as those of us who don't, and so many people in that industry tend to succumb because of the lifestyle. But it was a blast for me. I just had so much fun. I mean, we did Ozzy Osbourne on the cover, Snoop Dogg. Some of them would take some time, and then suddenly would happen. And Snoop Dogg was a lot of fun. He came to a photo shoot that we arranged. And I remember everybody was like scouting around to get some really good weed with Snoop Dogg that day for the photo shoot. And we felt like we had to have something really good. The guy's coming from Cali with an attitude. And so it was taking a little while, and some people were scouting around, okay, I know somebody. And you think there'd be just like, this big safe at High Times, you just dig in, okay, well, it wasn't quite, maybe now, but not quite then. Like that. We had to, see what was around, and so we get to the photo shoot, and Snoop Dogg is there, and he's with the photographer, and he's got kind of like, okay, where's the weed? And I said, no, it's coming, it's coming. So we talking with him, and he's going through the photographer's portfolio, and then the High Times guys show up, and they have a big bag of weed, like a quarter pound, of really great smelling buds. And so we opened it up, and everybody took a sniff. And Snoop Dogg put his head into this bag, put a good smell, and a big smile on his face, like, yeah, that's good. So we knew we won him over. We had Snoop Dogg on our side. Well, this photo shoot went like 4 or 5 hours. And the funny thing was that, there it was towards the end, and Snoop Dogg's on a couch, sleeping. And the photographer's like, we gotta go. I was like, Snoop, time to go. Time to go, Snoop. I remember me waking Snoop up out of a stupor at a High Times photo shoot. But we had a lot of fun. Those photo shoots were always sort of very mysterious. You didn't know who was, where it was going to be. We had to kind of not let anybody know. But I did a lot of that and had a lot of fun doing that. A lot of that leads me towards what I, continue to do today, which is my website, Celeb Stoner. And just focusing on marijuana through culture and media. I also wrote a book called Pop Culture, again focusing on the cultural aspects of marijuana. Whether it be something you see in a movie, or something on TV, or something in music, or how does it kind of flow through the culture? The so-called stoner movie, which was something that people didn't really refer to as such until we started talking about it at High Times. When, say, Friday came out, we did a cover story with Ice Cube, and there was sort of the beginning of that wave towards the idea of movies that embrace marijuana, besides, obviously, Cheech and Chong doing that from the beginning and kind of starting that, and High Times being involved with Cheech and Chong from the beginning as well. But it kind of like, during the Reagan era, even though there were a lot of drugs in the movies, and things shifted a little bit more towards cocaine in movies back at that time than marijuana, things started to shift back in the 90s with movies like Dazed and Confused, and Half-Baked, and all of a sudden marijuana became a big, fun element in movies again. So that was, one of the things I did at High Times as well. I started an award show there called the Stony Awards. We got a lot of fun. We'd have it at BB King's and have a lot of stars there. Kind of like the anti-Hollywood stoner movie award show, which High Times has stopped doing, and hopefully they'll pick it up again. It was a lot of work, and maybe that's why they don't do it anymore. But that was sort of the things I did. Another thing I did at High Times was an album series called Hempilation, which were 2 benefit albums I did with Normal. First one was called Hempilation, Freedom is Normal. The second one is Hempilation 2, Free the Weed. And this is something you could do then, but you probably can't do now. Back then, in the early 90s, again, very fertile time, lots of great bands. A lot of interest in a variety of subjects, including marijuana legalization from the bands. And so a lot of them would ask, what can we do to help? And a lot of times, well, I don't know, you could do a concert for Normal, or you could do something, And so then I saw a lot of these benefit albums popping up for different causes, and I thought, well, why not one for marijuana? And that really was my idea, and it doesn't sound like a brilliant idea. Anybody could have thought of that, but maybe I just thought of it first. And so So we started moving ahead with that and proposed to do it with Normal, to raise money for them and raise awareness for marijuana legalization in general and get bands all together on this project. And the third element was to get a record company behind it, and we found Capricorn Records, famous for the Allman Brothers and Southern Rock, and turned out Phil Walden, who's no longer with us, the head of the label, was a big stoner and a supporter of the cause, and he really jumped in. And they funded this project, which was really great. They were first in Nashville. They were originally a Georgia label in Macon, and then label kind of stopped and started, and they moved to Nashville. So our first album was done when they were in Nashville. Second album was done when they had moved back to Atlanta. But it was really a great relationship. And when I say it can't be done anymore, it's because the record industry's changed so much. There really aren't partners out there that would probably do that. And records aren't being sold in the same way. And the industry's changed quite a bit. I'm kind of just lucky that I was involved with High Times at a point when the industry was was so strong and still maybe heading towards a period of transition, but it was before that. So the bands were very accessible, labels were very helpful. Now probably a little bit harder to do that. You certainly couldn't do a Hempilation album, I think, in that way. It's been proposed several more times to me. What about a third Hempilation or something like that? But I don't see how we could do it. Capricorn is no more once again. Part of that whole company kind of faded out, and so we really wouldn't find another partner. But those are some of the things I really got to do when I was at High Times. It was very exciting for me that I could go around the country to events like this. I could be at protests, write about them. I could be covering bands. I could be doing cover shoots. I could be working on an album, like I said. I could be doing an award show. I could be doing, the High Times party at South by Southwest that turned into our Doobie Award show. There were so many great things I could do then, and just sort of, I don't know, it makes it sort of fun. I mean, to be an activist when you're trying to change the laws, but also your job is to go back to the office and put together a magazine that people want to read on a monthly basis. And that really is my skill, is journalism. And now I'm not doing that anymore, and I don't really miss it, but I did it for a long time where a lot of people at the time, maybe you didn't pay a lot of respect to High Times and made fun of the magazine, and there's a little bit of a pariah in publishing circles. But the fact of the matter is that despite, whatever the subject matter is, it's the same experience of putting together a magazine. You have to fill up so many pages a month with new material. And then you have to work with a team of people to do that, and you have to work with an art department to turn it into good-looking layouts, and you have to work with an advertising department to fill up all those pages, and you have to work with circulation people to make sure it gets all over the country. And so it's the same job whether it's Time Magazine or High Times. You're really doing the same thing. The paradigm is changing. Like I said 25 years ago when I went to High Times, no internet, no computers. Would you believe? I mean, really, when you think about it, 25 years, what a change. Can you imagine? I mean, I'm sure a few people in this room remember when there were no computers and we actually wrote on a typewriter. I did. That's how I started my career, hunting and pecking on a typewriter and using correct-to-type and, whiteout, and you didn't want to change anything when you submitted it, and you thought, oh, damn, I should have changed that, but you send it in already. Now pretty much whatever you write is fluid. It's on the screen. Hi, Barbie. It's on the screen. You can change it at a moment's notice. It really changes people's writing habits. Makes it easier, honestly. And that's the way it should be. It should be easy to write. So that was, that was a fundamental, difference. High Times was back then. I go back to when I was in high school. I'm happy that I'm old enough to know all this stuff. Because when they put out newspapers back then, it was done in a very manual fashion using machines called linotype machines that used to spit out lead lines that would be put into a layout on a page, and then the guys who were doing that would drop the lead lines into wherever it's supposed to be, and then you'd use wood cut blocks as your photo images. Everything, and it's very rudimentary, and then you wipe the page with ink and take a look at it and read it and then ask for changes, and then they go and they take a line out and put a new line in, and really old style. I mean, really, really old style. But that's the way it was. And then when I got to High Times, they were still on typewriters. They were sending out stories to the typesetter. The typesetter would send it back in a proof. Then you would read it and send it back to the typesetter with your corrections. Imagine all the time it takes to go back and forth and back and forth. Now it's just, you just swap it around the office, computer to computer, and it's so much simpler. But again, that's the way things were done. And so that's the way I sort of came up. But not that I like all that old stuff. I mean, I love all the new things that make, my job as a writer and editor so much easier to do everything on the computer. And so now that I have left High Times, and I left High Times 7 years ago, with the idea that I wanted to sort of express myself again as my own person. I love being in that world, people would flatter you, oh, you work at High Times, people, funny thing too, people thought that my name was, couldn't be real, Steve Bloom. It's gotta be a fake name, right? Bloom. But no, I'm Steve Bloom. So it's like the perfect, name to work at High Times. A lot of people change their names when they work at High Times. No. I mean, to this day, when people come to write for Celeb Stoner, they want to give me this funky name. No. I want your real name. The real person, don't hide. We're not in some sort of closet here. We're out front, we're expressing ourselves. So, so I was able to sort of, I had that name and I was able to, do what I do there. But I wanted to, things like I said, like say the Stony Awards or this or that, or anything I created in the magazine, it goes back to High Times. They own it. They have the right. I mean, I worked for them. So it was time to work for me again. I could own my own properties, anything that I create. So, like creating celebstoner.com. That is a website devoted to marijuana news, celebrity focus on, who are these celebs who advocate for legalizing marijuana. Obvious people like Woody Harrelson and Willie Nelson and Tommy Chong and Bill Maher, and then lesser known people, but still major players out in the celebrity world. And so that was sort of the way I decided to go, and also leaving print behind. That print is it's something I did for a long time, but I was sort of that approach to publishing is not really where I'm at anymore, and so. Things are very quick, you respond very fast. You post something and there's something wrong, you can change it right away. There's sort of collaboration that goes on just with the readers out there who read and tell you something that maybe you didn't get right. But for the most part, hopefully you're getting it right. And so what I do at Celeb Stoner is really zero in on, what I consider the most important marijuana news stories of the day. And just like what's going on TV, movies, music, sports. Like today's story, the one I posted today is about a basketball player named Larry Sanders who got suspended by the NBA for failing a third drug test for marijuana, and he's been in the league for 4 years, and basically said, listen, marijuana works for me. It works for me, I know all about it works for me in medical, it's good for me. So the league's behind the times, and what we're finding in sports is the leagues are way behind the times. They want to keep busting their players, and more people get busted and drug tested, more athletes, I think, than anyone get busted for marijuana, especially on the celebrity end of things. I mean, as far as I notice it, it's always the same thing. Some guy's driving somewhere, it's late at night in some town, and police pull them over, and it's usually very often college athletes who get caught up in this stuff, and it's a tough time for those people, even though things are changing. The sports world hasn't changed very quickly, and so that's today's story, is that this guy is embracing marijuana as a basketball player, but it's been taboo for years. So that could be today's story. That's celebrity in my mind because it's an athlete. An athlete is in the limelight, he's in the news, he's playing and performing for people on a nightly basis. Athletes are celebrities too. So that would be the coverage. And it just could be anything. I mean, lately, what has been fascinating me has nothing to do with celebrities, is the CBD wave of legislation around the country. Just fascinating, that all these states that would never ever in their right mind consider legalizing medical marijuana are suddenly jumping on the bandwagon to make cannabis oil available for children who are suffering from seizures, as we've seen here in New Jersey. Really, it all kind of started here, and so that now 2 states have signed into law CBD oil bills Utah and Alabama. Would you believe? You know, these two states are suddenly on our side. I've been asking the question constantly, are they legitimate medical marijuana states? Now that they have restricted medical marijuana use in Utah and Alabama. What do people think? Yes or no? No. Anybody think yes? Well, what I did on the website was I have a list of like, states that are legal for recreational, medicinal, or decrim, or hemp. Added those two states with asterisks. I feel like it's legitimate. You know, there's something new there that's accessible to a few number of people, but at least it's there when it wasn't there before. And anyway, it's a good debate. You know, is it legitimate to call those states medical marijuana states at this point? So that's what I'll focus on as well. So it could be anything. It's sort of what interests me. I'm a tastemaker. I look at the news and I pick out what I think is interesting that I think everybody else out there might want to read as well. Some of it is new stuff that we break. Some of it is stuff that is in the news and we kind of spin. You don't plagiarize. You take the story and you write it from a different perspective. What is it that you have to offer to this story that was already written? And furthermore, maybe people who read Celeb Stoner may not have seen it elsewhere, so you give it a spin, and you give it your own coverage, or you do some research that wasn't done in the that's the way I do it, to give people something worthwhile. Why do they want to come to the site? They want to learn something, they want to get some information that they didn't know otherwise. And they want to maybe share with their friends and spread it around Facebook and get people coming back to the website. So I just do the best I can. We're working with a handful of people, a handful of bloggers. I'm really kind of a microsite in that you can run a site on your own with a handful of people and make a living. That's part of the kind of business stuff that I could talk about that usually people don't ask. It's kind of like the low level of the marijuana industry is the media end of it. And all these websites out there doing marijuana news coverage, well, everybody's making a little money. I mean, you got advertisers paying and somebody's making a couple of bucks, so there is some revenue flowing through, the marijuana media on the web. And, my advice to people, although I'm not looking for more competition, but because there's plenty of competition already out there with tons of sites, is you can keep it really lean. I run my site, me and a webmaster. My webmaster is a guy named Garrett Overstreet, who is the head of Tulsa Normal. And I met him at a Normal conference, and he was speaking like me at one of the conferences about all kinds of tech stuff that was kind of over most people's heads. And I grabbed him afterwards, and I said, "You're familiar with my site, this and that." And I kind of brought him along, and he came in to be the webmaster a couple of years ago. So, Garrett gets a percentage of what we bring in for advertising revenues, and it's me and Garrett. And then with bloggers, there's a handful of bloggers, and I found a way to pay on a minimal level, but at least a little bit, and so you could, a bag of weed, is good payment for a blog, or, there's ways, to make a nice trade, because a lot of people, they work for free on the web, and that's changed dramatically too. Talk about the paradigm shifting constantly. When I came up, I was a freelance writer who wrote for $5 and $10 until it got to $1,000 or $1,500 or $2,000, for an article. But now the paradigm has shifted. You kind of give it away with hopefully creating a platform for yourself about something, or skipping traffic back to your own site. Huffington Post created the paradigm that you really don't get paid for your work. You put it out there because you want people to see it, and hopefully there's some overall benefit that comes back to you. And that's okay. It's a good way to create a whole generation of bloggers, but it's hard for people to make a living. So, if you're going to try and make a living, you and a webmaster is all you need. You wear all the hats. You deal with advertisers. You have them. They send queries. Occasionally, I just walk through the hall over there and I give out a bunch of cards. Maybe I'll get an advertiser out of this. It'll be worth my while. Isn't worth my while anyway, but that will even make it more worth my while. That's something, that we're supporting each other. That's the idea, is that we help support each other in this community. And now that it's kind of like, moving into this area of kind of business, it's even more important than ever that we support each other. Not go beyond, I went to a meeting last week in New York 2 weeks ago, the Marijuana Business Association, MJBA, Marijuana Business Association, that had a meetup in the city. And actually there was more people at a New York get-together than I've ever seen. And what was it? They were all sniffing out, business opportunities. They weren't really there to legalize marijuana, it seemed. And I thought, I kept on, like I'm being a little bit of old school in that crowd. I was to, have my, eye like half closed. I was like, you people here want to make money on something that's not even legal. So, step back a little bit and realize that New Jersey, different. You have it legal for medical, and then you just have to, change the law to, work better for patients. Hopefully things, will work out down the road. And now I know there's a lot of talk about decriminalization here too. And, so obviously those are the steps you have to take here, and the same steps that we have to take in New York, but we're even farther behind in New York because we don't have any form of legalization. I don't consider New York a medical marijuana state yet because of what Cuomo did, kind of, circumventing the legislature to sort of reenact an old law that really has no teeth. To make marijuana available via hospitals. It's never done. Now all these CBD programs, by the way, are trying to get hospitals involved. We'll see how that works. They want to get medical institutions involved to do research trials, meaning they need somebody growing it and then they make it available. Who knows if the feds are even going to allow it to happen. The good story for Utah is that they're so close to Colorado they can just swing on by. Go over to Colorado and pick up what they need. Alabama a little bit harder. You can't just kind of just, it's not on the border. So anyway, that's kind of my focus, and that's what I'm here to talk about today. I'd love if anybody has a question or two about anything I was talking about, or just in general, to continue this discussion for another few minutes. Anybody have any questions? Jim?
Steve, when you refer to the CBD only in Utah and Alabama, that's not 20 to 1 THC, it's 20 to nothing. It's CBD only without THC at all.
I'm not 100% sure on that, but I mean, maybe...
The only reason I ask is having listened to Martin Lee talking about his book, explaining, and I don't know, I'm taking it on his research, that without that one, the CBD oil isn't going to be effective for specifically what it needs to be effective for. So when I'm saying no, when it's like, is that actually make it a medical marijuana state? I want to qualify my no as to meaning, well, if it actually does work and Martin Lee is wrong to a degree, then it would be medical to me because it would be having medical benefit. But we haven't seen, I don't think, enough information on CBD oil only, no THC, to know if it's that same kind of effective. So.
Yeah, well, it seemed a little premature what all these legislatures are doing. Before there's enough information out there, they're just sort of jumping on kind of a bandwagon, almost a media bandwagon that was started by Sanjay Gupta in a lot of ways.
That's why I had to, being friends with the Wilsons, who were portrayed in Sanjay Gupta,
right.
I think, becoming close to them with their time that they had here in New Jersey. It was sort of all about that 1% that they had to keep reminding people, and I had to remind them when you talk about it, especially when he was just at that, Governor, please don't let my daughter die, which went viral on CNN with Governor Christie, that he should mention at every juncture, which doesn't get my daughter high. It's 20 to 1, mostly CBD, which does not get you high. And the more he said that, the more people leaned in to listen. Blew me away how it's about not getting high, and then everybody will listen. So I'm guessing that plays in Utah now. If it won't get you high.
Yeah, I'm not sure of the breakdown like you're saying, but either way, I think the point is clear. That they think that it won't get them high, so therefore it's okay to pass laws of this sort. That hopefully it will benefit the children. It's not some sort of scam, just getting something on the books to make them feel better about themselves.
We'll find out.
Did you see the episode of The Doctor? The show The Doctors?
I didn't see that.
Did you see it?
I didn't see it.
Oh, man. Okay. It was within the last week or two. It was the mother of, she's now 8 years old. At the age of 6, this mother signed the DNR for her daughter because they could not control the seizures. Now she's on CBD. They live in Colorado. The kid can't leave Colorado because she's medicated twice a day. Her seizures are under control. She's got good quality of life. She's 8 years old. Her mother was on The Doctors within the last week or two. And this woman's story, you can't watch it and not cry. You can't watch it and criticize anything this woman did. It's the most powerful thing I've seen in the major media, way more than even that Sanjay Gupta documentary.
Well, there's no question. I mean, my mother's watching TV. My mother's 86 years old. Did you see the story about the little kid? You know, everybody's seeing it now, and it's kind of caught on like a wildfire. I tend to think it's a good thing. I mean, there's a lot of cynicism out there, but I think it's good, you know, that even if it's very narrow, at least there's more of a focus on marijuana's benefit as a medicine. You know, so how does it harm us other than, you know, it's not broad enough to help enough people? You know, that in a new law in a place like Utah or Alabama, where you can only get, and that won't be accessible for quite a while anyway. The question is whether it even will ever be. Like in Minnesota, the governor there proposed a program that would involve Mayo Clinic, you know, being being the provider and doing trials. You know, so Mayo surprisingly said they were down with it. You know, which is interesting because there really hasn't been any major medical institution that's said they would. You know, like down in Maryland, you know, they have a medical marijuana law with no teeth, you know, where there's no distribution. It's going to change. That's about to change. But they were counting on Johns Hopkins and places like that to jump in. Nobody's jumping in. No hospital wants to get involved to be like a medical marijuana prescriber.
A few minutes ago, you mentioned Colorado. What are the exciting stories that are coming out of Colorado after 3 months of...
Well, Colorado's just huge. I mean, honestly, you know, I could do Colorado 24/7 on the website. This is somebody says, actually, you know, the story out of Colorado this week that had a real negative spin was the death associated with a student who came in from a college in Wyoming, went to Denver for spring break, went and bought some cookies, had a freak out at the hotel, jumped not out the window, but like the railings, you know, like 4 stories above, and flew out, you know, just jumped over it. He said he got very agitated. They don't know what happened. You know, can't blame it on marijuana specifically, but that's what the media is. I mean, the story's all over the media, you know. So Colorado has to be careful because they're kind of looking for things like that too. Just going to put pop the balloon. You know, the news is too good out of Colorado. They released their. Anytime Hager wants to come in, he can take over.
Oh, okay, yeah, I'll be here in about 5 minutes.
I'll pass it on to Hager.
All right, perfect. Thank you.
And yeah, they, you know, it's a tough situation there as far as how to deal with that. But yeah, like I was saying, as far as taxing, $14 million in January with very few new stores open. $2 million was made. So that was a little below what their overall estimates are, but still, you know, still pretty significant. You know, there's still a lot of towns that are kind of waiting. They're not jumping in yet. So, you know, Colorado is going to be a slow build towards, you know, the whole state, you know, having stores everywhere when everybody, you know, agrees. You know, there's certain towns like Colorado Springs that said no. So, you know, it limits, you know, what's happening. But we're heading towards 420. Colorado is ground zero for 420. It's been like that for years, ever since the Boulder campus exploded with the huge 420 rally there, you know, about 5, 7, 8 years ago, which by the way, now is banned. You know, they don't really need it anymore, I suppose. They made their point. They got marijuana legal. But there's just a tremendous number of events. Speaking of high times, you know, they have their Cannabis Cup coming in 2 weeks in Colorado, their U.S. Cup, which is their biggest event. And so there's going to be big expos, concerts like crazy. There's so much going on in Colorado. You know, the Denver Post hired, it got a lot of publicity. They hired a marijuana editor, a guy named Ricardo Baca, who is on staff at the Denver Post. And so he is in charge of the Cannabist, which is their website, which is just a great site. You know, honestly, part of me is like, I have responsibilities here in New York, but part of me is like, I want to just go to this guy Ricardo and say, hey Ricardo, just give me a job. I just want to just cover marijuana in Colorado now. I'll work for cheap. I just want to do it because it's such a great time to be there to cover, you know, the marijuana news. And I'm actually looking for somebody out of Colorado to do some coverage for the website. I haven't really found somebody yet. But, you know, people left and right are being hired for such purpose. Fusion television just hired a cannabis correspondent. So it's kind of a good time, for those of us in marijuana media. And one other thing I wanted to say, which I kind of forgot to mention, another story we did this week, and this is kind of original to Slep Stoner because I hadn't heard any news yet about marijuana arrests in New York for 2013. New York, of course, is famous for having the most marijuana arrests by far in the country. 2 years ago, there were over 50,000 marijuana arrests in New York City alone, which is staggering when you realize that, 15 or years before, there were less than 100, less than 1,000, and it had gone up to 50,000. Well, in the last 2 years, since there's been such a focus on stop and frisk, and the inevitability of stop and frisk is marijuana arrests. You get stopped, you get frisked, you might have some pot on you, you're busted for pot. That's where most of the marijuana arrests in New York come from, are stop and frisk. Well, stop and frisk is being stopped, more or less. It's down significantly. We have a new mayor, de Blasio. We have a new police chief, an old new police chief, Bratton. Bratton's been kind of taking some good shots at Kelly, the former police chief, who was, the architect of all the misery that we had in New York for the last, 12 years. And so, it's sort of a new day in New York. We're hoping, not that you can go down the block and smoke a joint and not be hassled, but at least, they're not really coming to get us the way they were. I got arrested a couple of years ago outside the Garden. I was parking my car, going to a fish show, and there were like cops all over the fourth floor of this parking lot. We had just smoked a little. We weren't hotboxing. They were all the fuck over us. I mean, I thought it was local, security guards or something. No, it was NYPD staking out the parking lot at the fish show, would you believe? And we kind of fell into the net. And there we were, missing our show and spending 10 hours in jail. And further just pissed me off. I kind of kept it sort of secret, didn't want my family to know, didn't want the older relatives to be upset about my, adventures. And but I just kept on just railing against Bloomberg and Kelly, just like, they're the worst, they gotta go, they gotta go, they gotta go. I just took it so personally after it happened to me. And I know 80% or more people who get arrested in New York are minorities, but I try to remind people that it's not only minorities getting arrested for marijuana in New York, and hopefully that will go down. Now these numbers are significant. 50,000 2 years ago, 39,000 last year, 50,000 2011, 39,000 2012, and now the new figure that I got from Harry Levine, and this has not been publicized, I don't know why, Harry's keeping it to himself or something. He sent me these great graphs with all the information, but nobody has this information yet, that there were arrested down to 26,000. So it's cut in half in 2 years. That's pretty good. I mean, obviously it sucks, 26,000 arrests, the worst, still the most in the country. But, what a big reduction that really is. So we should be proud that all the work that we've done as activists to, bring this issue to front and central. For several years, I remember I went to the first press conference that Harry Levine did with Deborah Small, and he gave out all this information about the marijuana arrests that have been going on in New York for like a decade, and nobody really knew. 400,000 marijuana arrests over 10 years, oh my God. Nobody really knew. They knew a lot of arrests were happening, but the numbers weren't out there. And so now he started pushing the numbers out there. And then Harry, I remember seeing Harry at one of the, some rally in New York, and we got together afterwards, had a little lunch, and he gave me the background on how people are getting arrested, the whole public views thing. And nobody really knew that either. When I got arrested, it was in public view because they smelled it. That is public view. They didn't see us. They smelled it. Now, when you're stopped and frisked, they take stuff out of your pocket. They tell you to take stuff out of your pocket. Kenny?
Well, don't they ask you if you have any, and then when you...
I don't think they're so polite. I don't think New York police are required to be polite.
Because this pot was deep ran.
Well, now they're going to start wearing cameras. They better be polite.